So welcome everyone at this webinar, Managing International Collaborations. Engaging in international collaborations is often challenging, especially for early career researchers, and that's why we are very happy to have Mike Evans this webinar hosted. And he will talk about this topic especially in regards to starting and managing a PAGES working group. Mike Evans is co-chair of PAGES, and we are very happy to have him here. Welcome, Mike.
Oh, thank you very much, and thank you to everyone for coming today. And it's a real honor to be talking to the Early Career Network. So I thought I'd start with a little bit of an introduction to myself, in case we've never met. So I'm a paleoclimatologist. I'm interested in observations and modeling, and that's what I do kind of in my spare time. Most of my time is I'm father to two teenagers. I have various projects going in my basement. There's 6 ferments in my kitchen, and this is a battery pack I souped up my car with. We have cats, and we have chickens, and we have a decrepit old house that we are constantly trying to fix. And I love to travel. Often this is with the girls. We go canoeing in beautiful remote places in the United States and Canada. But I also am very good at taking my bike places where I've never been and getting lost, traveling from one place to the other. More relevant to what our topic is for today, I was the overall lead for the Ocean 2K first phase, which was 2011 to 2015, and more recently for the data analysis and proxy system modeling working group. In 2016, I joined the PAGES Scientific Steering Committee, and since 2018, I have been the co-chair of that, along with Willy Tinner from Switzerland. Okay, so to today's topic. Let's see, page down. There we go. Okay, let me get rid of the loading meeting controls. Okay, so I want to talk about starting and managing a PAGES working group. So I thought I would start first with what is the process? So how do you go about this? And so and then from there I wanted to talk about what I think. This is just my opinion, but what I think are maybe some best practices for managing a working group, for leading a working group, which is something that I hope all of you will consider doing, because we really need you. We need your ideas. You are really what makes PAGES go. So along the way, I've sprinkled in some hyperlinks to various sources of information, and I'll make this presentation slide set available to you, so you can follow up and have those links all in one place. But really, it's all the PAGES website, and we may be joined here by Mouse, one of our cats. All right. Sorry, it keeps wanting to do that. So a little bit first about PAGES, in case you're new to PAGES. So PAGES is older than my scientific career. It was founded in 1991, and it has at this point over 5,000 members from 125 countries. So it really is. It aspires to be global. Currently, PAGES is kind of organized around the what's called the PAGES triangle, between the intersection between climate, humans, and the environment. And so along that triangle, which could look like a geological quaternary diagram, kind of fall all the various PAGES groups. And in the center of this are what we call integrative activities, things that bring these different working groups together in new and exciting sorts of ways. So as of 2020, there are about, and this number is not exactly accurate, I think anymore, 18 working groups is the subject of our discussion today. And we are also a fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable principles signatory. And all of this is really run by the paleoenvironmental science community with support from the International Project Office, which is based in Bern, and with support from the Scientific Steering Committee, whose pictures were on that front page, and also includes ECN member, most recently Stella Alexandrov. And is supported by, currently, it was supported for about 27 years by the US National Science Foundation and the Swiss National Academy of Sciences. Now it's supported by SNOT and the Chinese Academy of Sciences. And PAGES is also what's called a core project, one of something like 22 global research programs, all organized under Future Earth. Okay, so a bit of PAGES background, which is probably familiar to all of you since if you're in the ECN already. Okay, so how do you go about starting a working group? This is where you might start, and maybe you're interested in starting a working group because you've been to a PAGES meeting. Oops. And you said, I'd like to get involved. This is actually what happened to me. I was invited to a PAGES meeting that happened in 2010 after after a larger international meeting, and I'm sitting there in the room and listening to everyone talk about the PAGES 2K projects, which are here in this project, or rather in this PAGES triangle, and they're all talking about what they're doing, and so the North American group speaks, and then the Australian group speaks, and the Euromed group speaks, and the Africa group speaks, South America group speaks, so on and so forth. And so finally I raise my hand and I say, who's doing the oceans? And the answer was, well, nobody, but if you're interested, Mike. And that was the beginning of Ocean 2K. So, so the first step in starting a working group is generate a good idea. And actually PAGES does support scoping workshops. So workshops that will help you to figure out whether a working group would be useful. Next, you might organize a lead steering group. And for me, that process for Ocean 2K was to identify the people who I thought would be really great to work with. And they were also people I had never had the chance to work with before, but always really admired from their scientific work. So it was an opportunity to talk to those people and ask them, should we do this? How should we do this? Then review the guidelines for starting a working group and proposing a working group. Define your objectives and goals for the working group. You also need to plan for data stewardship. So if you're going to generate or otherwise reorganize, create a new data product, and by data I mean everything from raw observations gathered into a database to, say, simulations. Then you need to plan for how you're going to curate that data and make it available to others in PAGES. You'll also need to justify the relevance of the working group to PAGES. So you want to think about elements of its mission and its name, which is Past Global Changes. You may also want to think about outreach and education. and or what's called stakeholder engagement. Like, who cares about what you're doing and how you're going to kind of reach out to them. Then you're going to identify an early career network liaison. Hopefully that is easy for you folks. And last, you want to take all of these ideas and you're actually required to discuss them with an SSC member. This is to make sure you're kind of on the right track and to give you some feedback that may or may not be useful to you as you finalize your application. And then apply. And the next deadline, the last deadline I think was September 16th, so we've just missed it. But that gives you plenty of time to plan for early 2021. So there's usually two application deadlines per year so that we can consider the applications at 2 meetings of the executive committee of the PAGES SSC, which happen in the fall, usually like, November, and also in March, April, sometimes as late as May. So that's the process. And again, I've tried to link pieces of that into the PAGES web pages that will give you more information about what that might look like. There we go. Okay, now suppose you have a working group set up. Well, what PAGES typically funds are workshops. Okay, and there's a lot of restrictions on what actually PAGES can fund in its workshops. But one of those things that it does is it really tries to target early career researchers. Ding, 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 ding. So we try to support early career researchers. We also try to support researchers who come from regions and areas, subdisciplines, backgrounds which are underrepresented in PAGES. PAGES really does aspire to be global, and we could do a lot better job. And we need to look no further than the global reach of the ECN for a really nice model. So how do you start? Well, first of all, you have a good idea for a workshop topic. And I'd like to also suggest you think about what are called topical science meetings. These are meetings that we would like to encourage that are meetings across working groups. So to kind of do science in the cracks between the working groups. Okay, so we're really excited about this, and so it might be a really good thing to think about. Again, review the guidelines and the different workshop categories. I think there are 4, ranging from open science to really focused workshops that are promoting the activities of a working group. Also, educational type of workshops, like teaching how-to sorts of things. Again, define your objectives and goals and think about what are the outcomes of that workshop. So as specifically as you can, imagine what do you hope to come out of the process of meeting rather than everyone had a meeting and left. You also want to plan for data stewardship again, relevance to PAGES. And here often it's encouraged that there should be an outreach and education component. And this might also be stakeholder engagement. For instance, inviting people from outside your working group, maybe from the community, maybe from policy-making groups or governmental or non-governmental organizations which are interested in the relevance of paleoclimate to current and future global change processes. Again, you're encouraged to discuss your plan with an SSC member. In fact, I think the IPO requires it, but you personally know at least one of them now. Hi, everybody. And then be sure to apply before the deadline. And the deadline for the workshops is the same deadline, typically twice a year. So look for that to come in early 2021. So I'm about to change gears now and talk a little bit about what I think makes a working group successful, but maybe I should pause there and ask whether there are questions I can address before I go on. And I think you can unmute yourself and speak up. I will drink a little coffee.
Please feel free to also use the chat window to type your questions in the meantime, so they can be answered afterwards.
Yep. I don't see any new ones yet. Yeah, again, I've given you lots of links to follow up, and so you may not have questions now, but if you have questions later, at the very top of this presentation was my email address, and if you put the word pages in the subject line, I'm more likely to find it and respond to it in a really overloaded mailbox. But I'll try to respond to you very promptly. Okay, well, maybe there's no questions yet, but if there are questions or you're thinking about them or you've got all sorts of brainstorming ideas going in your head, I'll see if there's questions at the end, and hopefully there's lots of time for questions in this webinar. Okay, so what makes for a great working group? So what follows is really my opinion based on my experience, and your mileage may vary, as they say. Okay, but these are just my thoughts from being involved in PAGES working groups. So the first thing I would say is tackle big questions. So this is just an example of what I mean by that. I guess in general, what I mean by that is that PAGES working groups ought to tackle questions that are really beyond the reach, the expertise of any single PI research group in any one place, working at any one time. So this is an example from the 2K working groups, the climate of the last 2,000 years, with which I've done some work. Meeting controls, yeah, and so the work of the PAGES working groups spans not only observations and reconstructions of the. Estelle, could you mute yourself, please? Thanks.
Yeah.
So it spans not only synthesizing observations and performing reconstructions of past climate, which may involve observations of different archive types, different time resolution, and different temporal availability, but also doing those reconstructions, also looking at realistically forced climate simulations to try to derive process understanding, because while the reconstructions and the observations can tell you what happened, it's the simulations that tell you why it might have happened. It also enables the study of reconstruction methodologies. So often we use climate simulations as test beds to try to understand the strengths and weaknesses of those reconstruction methodologies. And part of that is also really understanding how the observations record information about past environments, and we call that forward or data modeling. So all of these things together really make for a rich 2K working group environment. And within that, we can ask really big questions, like, for instance, how does the climate of the past a few hundred years, how does it compare to the context which is provided by the last 2,000 years? And what are the mechanisms by which the climate varies on time scales, which kind of bracket the time scales of change represented by the anthropogenic time scales and the anthropogenic forcing of climate. So tackle big questions. The second thing I would say is to foster inclusivity. So open the doors wide for your working group and get everyone and anyone who is excited and motivated to work on the problem. And if the problem is a big question, you'll find that people are really excited to join and contribute and volunteer their expertise and their time. So this is some pictures of the Ocean 2K group circa 2012 or so. And this was kind of a self-selected group of volunteers starting from a set of maybe 80 who originally assembled to get the group started. And really, it's been shown in many contexts that the more brains you have and more perspectives you have from a variety of different worldviews and backgrounds and disciplines, the more dynamic the idea generation is going to be. The best ideas will rise to the top. So make it open. Next thing would be perhaps communicate and brainstorm and find platforms through which you can talk frequently and just generate ideas. And so while I'm not saying that necessarily you should all shower together, what I'm saying is that the second highest one of these in terms of idea generation is talking to someone. Maybe talking to someone while walking to lunch is a great combination. But a lot of working groups have been really successful by not only meeting in workshops, which might happen once or twice or possibly 3 times over the course of a working group's lifespan, but they will talk virtually and use electronic platforms and video conferencing to work in between workshops and to get a lot done in that way. The next thing I would suggest is there's often a lot of work getting projects off the ground. So some of these projects may involve gathering data into a unified digitized database. That has never been done before. And this requires a lot of time and effort tracking down these data, finding where they're available in public archives, repositories, and then assembling them along with their metadata, all the information you need to really understand and use these data intelligently. So my suggestion for this is to crowdsource it. So assemble many hands to make light work of that work of assembling those databases. And an example of this is from the ISO 2K working group, which has assembled stable isotopic data from a variety of different archives, paleo-environmental archives. And it's really astounding to me how many data are actually out there that cover the last 2,000 years. I was very surprised by this, but that was many hands making light work of a very large project. The next thing I would suggest is to try to make it as easy as possible for you and others to do synthesis and to enable integrative activities I mentioned, which kind of draw to the strengths of PAGES as a whole to address compelling scientific questions. And so one way of doing that is this is something that PAGES has supported, is to develop data and metadata frameworks that are flexible and powerful enough to encompass the variety, the range, the diversity of different sorts of information that PAGES wants to bring to bear on such questions. So an example of this is the linked paleo data framework, or LIPID for short. And LIPID is really cool because it combines information about geolocation and citation and data models or forward models how the information about the environment is imprinted into the archive from which we make observations. And then it has the actual data in all of its gory detail. And this is really beautiful because this platform is cross-platform, it's standardized, it's open source, it's flexible around the varieties of paleoclimate data. And I think Nick McKay and others are working on making this as accessible to PAGES members as possible. So we can not only make the data and its metadata available for really intelligent use, but also to make that data available to others, again, under the FAIR principles. This is all a lot of hard work. So if you're going to start a working group, be prepared to put in some hours. Here's Helen McGregor in some of the, I guess, mid to late days of phase 1 of Ocean 2K, putting in some hours to kind of make that project go, to get one of the manuscripts off the ground, out the door. So hard work is part of this equation as well. You're also going to make some great scientific friends. This is a picture of the group that assembled for a workshop that brought together people who work on PMIP, paleoclimate modeling, and also the 2K projects to try to understand whether there was agreement or disagreement between the reconstructions of climate and simulation of climate over this time period, and if so, why? So this was a phenomenal meeting. It was run by a tremendous amount of hard work by our colleagues from Spain, but you're going to make some great friends by talking about these ideas that kind of draw on everyone's expertise. And I hope you'll also do some great science. And so here's an example from a recent paper I was involved in with Rafi Neukom and others. And this was a comparison of reconstructions and simulations of climate over the past 2,000 years. And it focused on what we call the multi-decadal variability of climate. So when you isolate that multi-decadal, like 10 to 70 year period, time period variability, and in this paper, we focused on a reconstructed global mean surface temperature anomaly. We saw broad agreement at these timescales, which was a bit surprising to me for reasons I can explain in questions. Nevertheless, we saw it, and so this enabled what we call fingerprinting exercises, where you can compare or literally regress the reconstructions on simulations with all radiative forcings or just individual radiative forcings. And so this is essentially just a regression coefficient, which is non-dimensional. So the overall agreement around 1 means that there's agreement between the reconstructions and full forcing simulations. And what we found is that that agreement was largely because of volcanic forcing and because of greenhouse gas forcing, but not so much solar forcing. In addition, what we found is by looking at the residual to that fingerprinting analysis, which is shown in this figure, there's broad agreement, or I'd say they're not in disagreement. This is somewhat controversial perhaps, between the residual to that fingerprinting exercise, the residual variability that we could interpret as unforced reconstructed variability, and that which we would estimate from control model runs without forcing, and from periods that we reconstruct, which happen not to, just by coincidence, happen not to have much natural forced, natural radiative forcing in both reconstructions and simulations. So this gave me some encouragement that we could actually not only attribute the forcing of climate on these timescales, but also that the unforced variability in simulations going forward might not be too inconsistent with reconstructions of that forcing. And so that we might have some confidence in the combination of the forced and the unforced prediction of decadal timescale climate variation going out to perhaps the middle of this century, which is work that's kind of ongoing. So here's a summary in haiku, along with some photos of my favorite multi-decadal projects, my daughters. Starting with a haiku of that Neukom et al. 2019 paper. And then a little bit about the motivation for PAGES working groups. It really takes a village. And so if you have ideas that are big picture science, these are great topics for PAGES working groups. Some suggestions for how to go about it: crowdsource, work hard, take responsibility, lead by example. And how do you get there? How do you manage that? Well, I think it's by building consensus, by having healthy respect, being open and transparent, and just kind of focusing on those big picture questions that are going to kind of keep you going through that hard work. And just a reminder, the deadlines are in the spring and fall, and PAGES needs you, because PAGES, I think at its best, is community driven, and you are a very important part of the PAGES community. Okay, so that's my kind of prepared remarks, and again, I'm happy to have a discussion or to address questions that you have about anything I've discussed. Thanks very much for your attention. And you can go ahead and unmute yourself, and if you have comments or questions about anything.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Hi, Carol.
I'm Carol. Hi, thank you so much for this overview. It's a really nice overview for it. I was just wondering, how does the steering committee choose to fund a project or a working group or a workshop? Is there any external reviewing as well, or is it like a very intense steering committee meeting and then you choose there?
Yeah, so it's basically an internal review by the PAGES SSC. So we all get the applications. There are roughly between 15 and 20 of us at any given time. It fluctuates a little bit. So we're asked for each of the working group proposals, and then also for each of the workshop proposals, we're asked to read the application. We're asked to comment on its strengths and its weaknesses, and we do this in writing beforehand. And then we're also asked to comment on the level of support that we would recommend for it, and that might follow what the request is for in budget, or it might be smaller, or it might be larger. And then we discuss those things. We discuss each of the workshops or the working group proposals in the SSC. So that's usually done live. It was done virtually this past meeting. Sorry, I'm just going to admit here. And then those recommendations are taken by the executive committee, and the executive committee will make the final decisions on which workshops will be and working groups will be supported, and which ones Looks like my internet is frozen. Hopefully you can still hear me. Maybe you missed that. So I'll repeat it. So once the SSC has commented and discussed, the XCOM, the executive committee, will make decisions based on that input. And then there'll be feedback provided to each of the proposals via a liaison and via a written response. So does that answer the question, Carol?
Yes, yes, thank you very much. Great.
Okay. And those results are usually communicated by the executive director of PAGES. That's Marie-France Loot. So positive or negative result, you'll always get some feedback on what the SSC saw as the strengths of your project, and also you'll get some feedback on things it might like to see you to work on or expand into. Mouse decided to join us. Oh, so I see, I didn't know that PAGES also supports events where you can see if collaborations are possible. Forget the name. How does this work? So yes, I can see the questions if I look for them, and the answer is this is a what's called a scoping workshop. If I could go back there. It's here. Let's see if this works. There's the link. If I click on it, it wants to open up a browser perhaps. And I probably have to. So if you have questions about any of this, okay, so here's information about, let's see. So you can, so there's literally a form, okay, and you have to answer all the questions that have the stars in them. And so you'd want to explain exactly why and how a scoping workshop might do, and what you expect to be the outcome of that. And it mentions scoping exactly where, I don't remember. So if you have any doubt about the relevance or the motivation, whether a scoping workshop would be valuable, what do? Yeah, contact an SSC member. And you might say, who are the SSC members? And so here's a screenshot from our last SSC meeting, which was supposed to be in South Africa, but couldn't be because of the pandemic. And so if you also click on this link, you'll see the SSC. There's that picture. And here's the SSC membership currently leading the pack. There's Stella. And you can see our different backgrounds. And so you can contact any one of us to ask for some advice about that. And so just because you're required to do that before you actually submit an application, doesn't mean that you can't identify an SSC liaison and get some input on whether this is relevant, whether this would be encouraged even before you go through the work of making this application. Did I answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. What other questions have you got?
So in order of the questions that are now in the group chat.
Okay. So usually how many proposals were submitted per year and how many got approved? That is a good question. And I don't have that information at the tip of my tongue. I'd have to kind of look it up. My sense is it can vary from year to year. And the answer also depends on PAGE's finances from year to year. So in 2018, 2019, when the US support for PAGES was ending and it wasn't clear whether we were going to have additional support, we were a little bit conservative and we decided that we would maybe not support as many workshops as we typically might. And then fast forward into 2019, 2020, when the Chinese Academy of Sciences stepped in to replace and actually slightly increase the support that was ending from the US National Science Foundation. Then we were able to support more workshops. And then the pandemic kind of threw everything kind of, exploded everything. And so a lot of workshops went virtual. And so we have more funding available rather than less for upcoming workshops. So to answer your question, maybe on the order for workshops, maybe on the order of working groups, let's say, maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 each year, and maybe the ones that would get approved would be 1 or 2, and that really depends on the strength of the application and the extent to which it kind of meets, kind of is relevant to PAGES and has been fully thought out. For workshops, maybe on the order of 12, 12, and ones that get approved, it can range from nearly all of them to maybe half or fewer. And again, that depends on meeting all of these criteria, and also depends a little bit on available funding and the funding that is requested. So long answer to a short question, but the short answer is it depends.
There's also this question from Madeline Metty. What are the expectations of a working group leader? Is there a roadmap provided, etc.?
Yeah, short answer, no. No, the long answer is yeah, there are some very, very broad guidelines, but PAGES kind of recognizes that groups will work in very different ways depending on the nature of the science and the nature of the working group. But typically, PAGES has come to try to encourage steering groups. So that's why I mentioned organize a lead steering group. And this allows you to spread the workload of leading a group a bit broadly, and it doesn't mean that the progress of the working group will depend on any one person solely. And that's kind of along the lines of that PAGES working groups ought to be global and community driven. So even though I was, for instance, designated the overall lead of Ocean 2K, I very quickly assembled a steering group, and that steering group kind of shared the burden, the responsibility of kind of moving forward and organizing and making progress. So I think PAGES now kind of recognizes that, but they also like to have a clear line of communication between the IPO and the working group leader and leadership via the SSC liaison. And sometimes it's easiest to do if there's like just 1, 2, 3 points of contact. So there's this balance between communicating with a small group of people, then disseminate to the larger working group, and encouraging a group of leaders and a kind of a flat management rather than a hierarchy. What else can I say about that? For a workshop, it's often really useful to have 1 or 2 points of contact. But there's a lot of like logistical details that need to get nailed down, usually by the local host. So that's often, you know, a single person kind of designated to do that. Although it would probably be great if there were more than 1 person at the hosting site to help with that. That's just my experience. Other questions in the chat? I don't see some yet.
Tamara's question is still there.
Oh.
How do you manage communication within your working group, and what is the best way based on your experience?
Yeah, okay, thank you. So communication within a working group, again, that has evolved over time. So you may find this amusing, but when we started Ocean 2K, we were kind of a little revolutionary in the sense that we decided that we didn't have the time or energy to meet. You know, I had small kids, and one of my colleagues had an aging parent who needed a lot of care. So we decided, you know what, we just don't want to spend the money on meetings. We'd rather kind of work virtually and continuously instead. So we use Skype. Yeah, Skype, okay, and it worked. It wasn't always great. Sometimes we had really bad Skype connections. We use email. We use things like Google Documents. More recently, we use things like Overleaf to write in tech. And we might take advantage of the fact that working group members might be spread across 16, 18, 20 time zones. So I might work on something and in the morning here, and someone would pick it up in the afternoon in Europe, and someone pick it up the next morning in Australia. And by the time I woke up, the project had moved forward quite a bit. And so, you know, 24-hour workday is kind of, when things are really humming, can be really an advantage of a global project. Let's see, did I answer the question there? The IPO will also help facilitate things like they used to run, and I think they still run in Adobe Connect meeting room. So that's available, and they will also host, at least temporarily, database management and development. So platforms are available to you. And I think now with the pandemic world, I would want to encourage you to think really creatively about how you might use the resources that would otherwise be spent on in-person workshops, which might not be possible, or maybe they would be possible in a way that was kind of pandemic friendly. So I would think imaginatively about how you might develop resources. And I think there's a real opportunity to pilot different models for effective workshops and effective working group operation now that we're in this pandemic era. So let's see, there's other questions. So does PAGES support early career researchers who are not permanent members in a research institute? Yes. In fact, when you propose a workshop, you are really encouraged to throw most of the resources that PAGES can give you toward the support and mentoring of ECRs. So in the most recent DAPS workshop, that I organized in 2019. This is where we put all of the money that Pages gave us. We put it into travel and lodging for the ECRs we were able to admit, and everybody else had to kind of self-fund and was happy to do so. In terms of proposing working groups, there's no requirement that someone who proposes a working group has to be a permanent member of a research institute or other sorts of organization. But I also recognize that this is a lot of work, and it's also worth thinking about whether you have the time and a plan set forth such that your work as part of a PAGES working group, or your activity and workshop and the products that come out of that are all really contributing and hopefully supporting your development as a scientist. And I think PAGES is really open to figuring out and brainstorming ways in which we can make this so. Can you summarize again some examples of typical end products from working groups in the recent past? Any examples that fall outside of the category synthesis project? I think that's a great question, and I think I did not talk about that explicitly. The most obvious product is peer-reviewed publication, and it's also mostly the case that these, again, PAGES products tend to fall into the category of cannot really be achieved, are really difficult to do without this kind of multidisciplinary, multinational collaboration. Some examples of things that fall outside of those categories. One could be a white paper that might be about recommendations, say that place current work on, say, risk of extreme events in the context of the paleo-environmental risk, or the study of cascading risk. I think there are opportunities to develop products and develop contributions that help to connect PAGES to Future Earth. So Future Earth has a mission which is basically around sustainability science, and it embraces much more social science than PAGES does, although PAGES also is trying to develop into that direction. So I think I would say I guess at the brainstorming stage I would think really broadly, and then discuss and get feedback from your chosen PAGES SSC liaison, and yeah, so it's all possible. I think those are. I'm having trouble giving you some other sorts of end products that fall outside of synthesis. Typically, PAGES does really want to encourage things that are not regional, but are more global, and do bring the community together to work on a problem of kind of global interest, rather than particular disciplinary interests. But I think if you look at the current working groups and the sorts of things that they have produced, this is another way to get an example of the sorts of things that that can happen. So that was a really long question without much specifics. Sorry about that. I think I would have to do some more research to answer that, but we can all do some more research by looking through these links. Did I miss any other questions in the chat so far?
me again, Carol.
Yes, hi.
Sorry. I was wondering, so from your experience in Ocean 2K, if you wanted to involve stakeholders, what were your arguments when contacting stakeholders? What would you tell them to convince them to work with you, or what are the things you would tell them that you could provide, or what would be the benefits from stakeholders collaborating with your working group, if that applies? I don't know if you would have any examples of that.
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's worth some thinking about for any idea that you might come up with. For DApps, we were really kind of focused on methods and developing methods, and so that was kind of esoteric from the point of view of like a stakeholder who might be, say, you know, a policymaker thinking about climate change and adaptation and mitigation sorts of things. But you might imagine a stakeholder could also be a group like the World Climate Research Project or program, which is a scientific partner of PAGES. So we have in the past kind of collaborated and worked together, and representatives from WCRP participated in PAGES meetings and vice versa. They might be interested because maybe the approaches that we were developing and exploring in DApps with these really sparse observations with amplitude and time and frequency uncertainty, they might be a really good test bed, like a really stiff test, a really difficult test for the same sorts of techniques which are used in the analysis of modern and historical direct climate observations, which is something that WCRP is doing as well. So that could be an example of like a scientific stakeholder. For Ocean 2K, for the workshop, I was, long story and kind of sad story, I was not able to attend our very first workshop in Barcelona in 2015 because my wife had passed away suddenly just a few weeks beforehand. And so, but that involved some public outreach. So we had an event in which I think there was a public forum for that meeting in Madrid, the past 2K meeting I showed you the picture of. We actually had a bilingual event where we answered questions from the public about climate science and public policy, and the subtitle of the talk was the forum was, "Are we talking past one another?" Like, you know, we need to, so it was about communication. For the DApps 2019 meeting, I gave a public outreach talk. It's the first and only and perhaps ever time I will ever give a talk with a alcoholic beverage in one hand and a microphone in the other, but somehow it kind of worked. It was actually staged in a bar, which hosted science, public science talks. And so there was a mixture of community, this local people with some scientific interest, and the DApps working group members who would, you know, throw me softball questions from time to time in that forum. So there's lots of different ways you can do that. For projects which are talking about, say, extreme events and things like droughts and floods, I know that there's been a lot of interest, longstanding interest, with people who are called water managers, people who say have to plan for reservoir capacity for freshwater resources in places that rely on surface water and the balance between surface water and groundwater. They start to think on timescales of longer than a few years when they're faced with a decade or more of lower than expected rainfall, and their reservoir levels keep dropping. So they want to know, do I need to plan for this in the future? Or is this just kind of like a really oddball event? Well, paleoclimate can give some context to that. Say, yeah, well, actually it happened. And it even happens before we had imposed on top of that the anthropogenic drying signal in your particular area. So not only do you have to deal with that, but you might have to deal with that times 1.3. So those are some of the ways in which you might engage. I know from talking with sometimes to explore these sorts of things, it's often the case that, and it's great to have that be a bilateral communication. So it's really important to learn from stakeholders what they need, because what we often provide is not necessarily what stakeholders need and what they can make use of. So learning what sort of information will be valuable is maybe more important than what information you might be able to provide to stakeholders. So emphasizing that when you reach out to them, I think is really important. We need their input. We need to know what sort of information will be useful, and try to match it to the sort of information we can provide. And then last thing I'll say is that if the workshop is in a place where that stakeholder can come and go really quickly and be involved and learn, but not devote days, weeks, months to it, I think that's probably preferable for most such people who are working in, say, some kind of professional or policy making sort of post. They're really busy people. They're interested. We need to hear from them, but make it easy for them, I suppose. Another long answer to a short question, but did that address it?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay. Looking through to see if there are other questions so far.
I think we should wrap it up. So if there's any other questions, please ask them now, or Michael said that he will provide his email address, where you can always contact him on.
Oops.
And
there's me. Yep.
Yeah.
You can also, of course, contact the Pages IPO, and you'll get a response from the executive director, Marie-France. There's Marie-France.
Yes.
One more question. Yeah. Oh, okay.
Is there one more question?
No, I just saw it was just a note of thanks, and I just also want to say thanks for all your questions and for your participation.
Yeah. Finally, I would like to give the word to Tamara, because Pages ECN recently formed a science cluster. Now that we cannot see each other that often during workshops, and the YSM and OSM have been postponed, the science cluster might be of use. So I would like to give the word to Tamara if she would like.
Yes, thank you, Nick. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Oh, well, thank you, first of all, Michael, for this great overview and nice and clear answers to all those interesting questions. I have a very short announcement. Yes, as Nick mentioned, we did launch a scientific cluster, or science cluster as we call it, within Pages ECN. So if you are interested in starting a working group, which is very much relevant to the topic of this webinar today, or you're just looking for some like-minded people to collaborate on scientific questions, whether it's broad or narrow, please consider joining us, and contact us on science.pages.ecn@gmail.com. And we will provide any further information, or you can just contact Pages ECN if you have any additional questions. So that's my brief announcement. Thank you. Oh, yes. Yeah, I can just type it in the chat. Thank you.
That sounds great. What are some of the science focuses or foci in the science cluster so far?
We're just starting up, so we want to collect as many or have as many people as we can to be as inclusive as possible and start somehow maybe brainstorming ideas based on our backgrounds and what is the interest within a group. We do have now a first what do you say, scientific product of PAGES ECN, a peer-reviewed paper. So it's a nice experience, and we think that we should use our multidisciplinary network in a better sense. So yeah, hopefully we can define it very soon, all the scientific scope questions.
Yep. Yep, and it just reminds me that the 30th anniversary issue of the Pages magazine is something which the ECN is contributing a number of articles to. And if I were more organized, I would have put that table of contents into this set of slides, but I wasn't. However, there are a number of planned contributions that is all being organized by the ECN, and that's a terrific contribution. It also might be an opportunity to kind of see where Pages has been and where it might be heading, and that might encourage or inspire working groups. Just a thought.
Yes, definitely. So with Pages ECN and the other Pages working groups, I'm sure that we will can go forward forward to another 30 years. And Tamara put the email address of science.pages.ecn@gmail.com in the chat.
There it is. Yeah.
So send them an email if you're interested, if you haven't joined already. And I want to thank you very much, Mike, for giving this great overview. We will put a recording on YouTube, so it will be stored forever.
That may be a good thing or not, but thank you very much for the opportunity. It's really a pleasure to speak with you all and to hear your questions, and really excited about the present and future of the ECN. So good work, everyone.